right. Hey, friends. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Tori, and today I am joined by a very special guest. I have Johan from Library of a Viking with me today to chat about all things fantasy, possibly some Malazan Book of the Fallen. We'll see where we go with this chat.
Yeah.
But Johan, would you be willing, for anyone who doesn't know who you are watching this video, would you be willing to just introduce yourself and your channel?
Yeah, of course. So I started BookTube approximately 10 months ago, but I was more active on Instagram, and then I branched out onto Instagram. I love everything, especially fantasy. Also do read a bit of sci-fi and horror every once in a while. And yeah, I'm 26 years old from a small country called the Faroe Islands, and I currently live in the UK. So yeah, that's a very short introduction about me.
That's okay. It's a lot of good information. So I will say, with noticing that you were from the Faroe Islands, I loved the video that you did where you were at the festival and you were interviewing all of the different people about their favorite book. And that was just so much fun to see in a small community, like what the books are that, and some of them surprised me. And it was just, as fantasy lovers, we're always so obsessed with culture and to begin with. So it's always fun to see people in different parts of the world and what they love and how it's the same or different. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it was definitely quite out of my comfort zone doing that video, but I really did enjoy it. And it's definitely made me more brave for other videos to actually go out and chat with people.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I wanted to touch on for sure in this chat was the reason I reached out to you in the first place is when you did your video on Malazan Book of the Fallen, and you had read Gardens of the Moon, and I think you said you got halfway through Dead House Gates.
Yeah.
And when I was going through your Goodreads to kind of see what series that we had in common, that was the one book. Dead House Gates is the one book in your DNF category. And I loved that you followed that up with the, oh, did I trigger a fandom video? We're all doing that at some point in our YouTube career or other. Yeah. And I think I was really intrigued by that because I love Malazan, and it's been a really formative book for me on my fantasy journey.
Yeah.
But I think it just went to showcase how everyone has such a different reading experience, right?
Yeah.
Like Dead House Gates is one of my favorite books I've ever read in fantasy, and it was something that didn't work for you. So I think with that, I'd really love to segue into talking about what are the tropes or story elements or character types in a book that really keep you going in the book? Like, what are the things that you love to see in fantasy that draws you into a book or series?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about this, really. But the more I thought about it, the more it all comes down to characters and how an author portrays characters. Like the world building in a series can be absolutely phenomenal, and the writing style can be incredible. But if I don't feel attached to characters, really, then at the end of the day, I probably won't enjoy the book as much. Even right now, like I'm reading The Prior of the Orange Tree. I'm not sure if you've read that book.
I haven't yet.
The world building is phenomenal. The writing style is absolutely beautiful, but I don't really feel that attached to any of the characters. I will read to the end, but it's been a bit more of a struggle. And that is really my biggest, I wouldn't even call it criticisms, because it's just very interesting how Erikson writes characters.
It is.
But I didn't feel attached to anyone, really. And I had read almost like 1,200 pages of the series. And I just felt at that point, like I needed to care for someone. The world building was astounding. The writing style was incredible. The scope, everything was just mind blowing. But I didn't really care for anyone, and that's actually why I just felt like I couldn't continue. That being said, I haven't given up on Malazan like 100%. Like when I hear like people like you and Phil Chase talk about how that series has changed like their lives almost, I really want that experience, and that's also what I wanted initially when I picked up the series. But yeah, it was just a bit too much for me, but I do hope someday to get back to the series, and hopefully my life will be changed.
Yeah, I think, I think I mentioned this on the comments in your video too, but it's tough because Malazan is definitely one of those books that is very polarizing, I think, immediately for a lot of people. And I do think that Gardens of the Moon as a first book in the series is a really tough sell, honestly, because you know, it was originally written as a screenplay, and you can tell that it wasn't originally in novel format. It's almost not disjointed, but it feels very different than the normal, you know, layout of a novel, and even than book 2, book 3 in the series. I didn't particularly feel connected to many of the characters in Gardens of the Moon. I think Apsalar was one that pulled me in right away. But again, she's a young girl and she's been through some things, seen some things like every other character in Malazan. And I think maybe it was the relatability factor for me with her because I kind of latched onto that. But yeah, talking about characters, I think that relatability factor is kind of, we start a book and we find a character that we can relate to in some way, and that really helps immerse us initially in the story. Which, with Malazan, it can be difficult to do that because, like you said, he doesn't write characters the same way that we're used to in a lot of fantasy books. And it can be hard to tell, do I root for this character? They're doing some pretty awful things, but they have endearing qualities. My brain's confused.
I think also another element, I mean, again, character is everything for me, but the way the story and the plot is structured is just so different. It feels like you start reading from page 500 or even 1,000 in a fantasy novel, and you have no idea what's going on, and you're just trying to catch up. And like initially, like I had been told that you're gonna feel very confused for a very long time, and that's okay, and just follow the flow. But I just kept feeling confused, and whenever like I started to understand something, the book would just jump to another character, another location, and I just felt constantly frustrated with, I don't know what's going on here. And my biggest issue really wasn't the confusion, but more, I didn't know if I should understand what I was reading. And that was my biggest like struggle. Like if I did it now, I'll probably read it with someone that had read maybe the series, and I would just ask the person, am I supposed to understand this? And that person would tell me yes or no. But I just didn't know. So I spent a lot of time just researching, trying to understand like the chapters and stuff, which just took out all the fun out of reading, really.
Yeah, it's tough when, especially like coming out of college, I did not read for quite a long time because there was such a, you know, as an English major, I was so tired of trying to analyze every detail in every book I read, and I kind of lost that reading for pleasure. And going back, I read Malazan, the first, I think 2 or 3 books in college, which kind of surprises me. I had no idea what was going on. And that's why, you know, when people say you need a PhD to enjoy Malazan, I completely understand where they're coming from. I'm the type of person like you where characters are everything, and especially those really powerful emotional character moments. And for me in Dead House, there are 2 very specific ones that one kind of in the middle and one at the end that 10 years later still haunt me.
Really?
Like I'm just still thinking about them at the same level of vibrancy that I did when I first read the book. Even though I don't have a clue half of what's going on, those character moments were enough to put it at the top of my list. So
I received so many comments that people were like quite sad that I stopped midway through that escapes. Everyone talks about like you have to get to the ending. And I don't know why, but I'm quite intrigued to know like why I should go back to read it. But like I would also like to say that like I don't hate this series at all. I have a great respect for it, and I really do want to love it. I think maybe if I go back to read it now, I would potentially enjoy it more, just because I do know more what to expect. And I thought I knew what, like, I thought I was prepared, but like you can't be prepared for how crazy like the story and everything is, really.
I've even talked to a few people that said, oh, I've read Tolkien, that's vast, it'll be fine. I'm like, no, like this is just its own level of scope. Like it's
like reading the Silmarillion almost.
Exactly.
For 10,000 pages.
Right.
Maybe a bit more structure.
Right. Now remind me, so you've read The Wheel of Time, correct?
I read the whole Wheel of Time, yeah.
Okay, so that is a series switching from Malazan to maybe kind of the opposite end of the fence, and something that I think kind of correlates. I was told, I've started Eye of the World 3 times.
Yeah.
And I got about halfway through and I was like, I can't. And it wasn't clicking with me. I was having a hard time finding characters to care about. And I was told by a friend of mine who read the whole series, oh, by book 5, you'll love it.
Yeah.
And
that's a tough selling point, isn't it?
No, and that's tough. And like, so I could sit here and say, Johan, if you can get to like the end of book 3 of Malazan, you'll love it. Maybe. But that's a hard sell because Wheel of Time is the same for me. Yeah,
it's a hard sell. I wouldn't agree with that. Like, if you don't love the books at least for book 2, then it probably isn't for you. But yeah, I mean, the Wheel of Time has so many issues, and my wife is currently reading it. She's on book 7, and it's just quite funny to hear her frustrations and also what she loves about the series. I think one of the things that probably helped is that I hadn't read that many fantasy books when I picked it up. I read Mistborn, and then I got into Wheel of Time. I knew Daniel Green said that Wheel of Time was one of the greatest series ever, so I really wanted to experience the whole thing. So I just kept reading it, and I really enjoyed it. I think if I picked it up now, I would probably be much more critical than I was like 3 years ago when I read it. But yeah, like, one of the things that is great with the Wheel of Time is that, like, the prologue is epic, but the story is quite focused. So it helps you get attached to the characters, and then the world and the plot just expands and keeps expanding throughout the 14 books. While Malazan, like, you're just dropped into this world that is so old, that has so much lore and history and so many characters, and it's just insane. It's a whole nother experience. I don't know anyone who writes like Erikson. Like, I've never experienced anything like that before. It is very dense and very challenging, which is also one of the reasons why I didn't enjoy it that much. I don't mind being challenged a bit, but it just felt like it was just too much. Like, I didn't enjoy that part of it. Just constantly being challenged by how he wrote world building and characters. But it's very impressive.
It is. I think too, though, and I'm finding that right now, I'm in like this tiny little bit of fantasy burnout, and I kind of felt it coming after I finished Faithful and the Fallen this last month, because I sped through those in less than a month.
Wow.
And
that is mad.
It was a lot. And I put Wrath down, and I was like, oh, I need some standalones. And I think you have to be in a very, a lot of us are mood readers, I feel like, in the fantasy community, and committing to a series, and especially as I get farther into fantasy reading, it's a big commitment. And sometimes you're just not in the mood to sit down with a 10-book series with that level of scope and intensity. So I think it also depends on, when you pick it up and what your mood is for reading at the time, because like right now for my October TBR, I basically it's like, nope, if I start any series, it will be The First Law, which I've been talking about for the last 3 months. And other than that, I'm reading some short standalones and just kind of relaxing away from the giant series for a little bit.
I recently heard, do you know Joanna? She's a booktuber. So she said that what helped her was, when she read Malazan, was just to focus on the overarching themes of the story, and then just be okay with like the confusion stuff. That might be helpful if I just did that. But again, like, I need the characters as well. But I'm intrigued. I can definitely see myself going back to it someday.
Well, I'm planning on doing a reread of it at some point in the future as well. So we might be able to get like a little Discord server going for everybody. I know there are quite a few Malazan fans that do rereads pretty frequently.
Definitely let me know if you do pick it up again.
Yeah, for sure. I bought myself, where are those? I don't know where I put, there he is. So I bought myself like these, my ring light just fell over. Technical difficulties. I just bought myself the paperbacks because nice. I was like, the second version, I'm going to go back in with a pencil. Like really figure out what it is about these books that kept me coming back, even though I was completely confused and had no idea what was going on. But yeah, and like I said, I try not to say never with book series too, like with Wheel of Time. I have several friends that really, really love it, and I can totally understand why based on what I've heard. So I'm not going to say never. So maybe I'll do a retry of Wheel of Time at some point when I'm ready for 14 books?
Yeah, 14 books and a prequel. I doubt the Wheel of Time will be for you, to be honest. If you've tried it 3 times, you don't enjoy it by this point. It probably is not for you. It's very tropey, especially in the beginning. It's very classic fantasy. The writing style is very repetitive and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you don't enjoy that, then it probably won't be for you.
Do you feel like in the fantasy community that there's almost, not with like everybody, but there seems to be kind of a canon? There's a little bit of pressure, like here's the list of books that have you read this canon of fantasy? And sometimes I go in and I'm like, well, I haven't read The Wheel of Time. I haven't read Lord of the Rings yet. I grew up on the movies, but that's some people are really weird about that. So it's always interesting to me to see, like, this is the unofficial canon of fantasy literature. Have you read them all?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely felt that. I really try not to let that bother me, to be honest.
Yeah.
There are so many like big series that I haven't read. Like I started reading 3 years ago, so I haven't had that much time. And like, I'm also like, I wouldn't call myself a mood reader, but occasionally I would like to just pick whatever I want to pick up. And a lot of new releases, I'll read a lot of new books, some self-published books as well. They'll take up a lot of time, which has not allowed me to read like The Name of the Wind, The Gentleman Bastards. I haven't read those series. I've only read the first 2 books of the Game of Thrones, for example.
Sure.
And there are just so many other series I really should have read if I should call myself a fantasy reviewer. But yeah, it's fine. Just read whatever you want to read, really.
Yeah, I feel that too. And I went through at especially at the beginning of getting into the fantasy community, that kind of guilt about, oh no, I need to read all these books, and I put them on and with some of them, it was like, but I know what I like. And I don't know that I'll like this. So feeling like I have to read it was kind of something that I had to work through when I was first getting into fantasy, and finally set it aside and say, you know what? I can be super happy for all of my friends that love The Wheel of Time. If I never get to it, it'll be okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with that.
So moving into, because I know I started reading fantasy when I was in college about 10 years ago, but really seriously started reading it probably around the same time you did. But Mistborn sounds like was the kind of gateway for both of us, moving from Malazan to Brandon Sanderson, because we have to fit the background of our chat at some point. So why do you think, and I hear this from so many people, that Mistborn was kind of their gateway into epic fantasy? You almost hear it ad nauseum on YouTube. You know, everybody, oh, Mistborn, it's always in the list somewhere. So I'd be curious to chat a little bit about, since that was a gateway for both of us, what do you think about Mistborn is so good at pulling people into the genre when they don't have a lot of experience with it? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of things with Mistborn, and it's quite weird. I call Mistborn one of my favorite series ever, but I've only read it once.
Same.
But the impact it had on me was just so huge, and like Library of a Viking probably wouldn't be a thing if it was for Mistborn. So I feel totally comfortable calling it my favorite series. But there are a lot of things. I mean, Brandon Sanderson has a very accessible writing style. It's very easy to follow the story, follow what's going on. So it's not that difficult to read. The characters are very, very relatable, almost all of them, which is really good. And I think the pacing is spot on. Even like when you start reading the Mistborn trilogy, you think the plot you get introduced to in the first book will span over 3 books. Or like you have like it wraps up at book 1. So the pacing is just insane. And I think for a lot of people, the hard magic system, like we've grown up with Harry Potter, with like they have some rules there, but it's also a bit soft, I would call it. The Lord of the Rings, there's so many like classic fantasies that have quite a soft magic system. And at least for me, my first introduction to a hard magic system, like that hard with so many rules, was Mistborn, which is just mind-blowing to me. And then I think atmosphere. I remember still the prologue, like you hear about ash falling from the sky. It's just very atmospheric, and it just will draw you in. So I think it's just spot on, especially for people that want to get into fantasy. You have great characters, accessible writing style, you have great pace, you have good atmosphere, and just a really good story as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like you mentioned the atmosphere, and I tend to lean, I think a lot of people that are drawn towards fantasy do tend to like a little bit of dark edge to the things that they read. And so that atmosphere, that kind of dark, foreboding atmosphere, and the idea that, oh, the Dark Lord won.
Yeah.
Like you, Sanderson, talking about that always intrigued me. Like, what a, every good story starts with a what if. And, we kind of get introduced to some familiar tropes even in the beginning, because a lot of people, even if they're new to fantasy, the hero's journey isn't just always in fantasy. You see it in movies all the time too. So when you come in and you have Vin, who's the endearing, doesn't play well with others street urchin, but she also has a mentor character in Kelsier, albeit a little bit twisted, but that's okay. So I think it does a good job of introducing some themes and characters that would be familiar to people from what they have read or seen. But
I totally agree. I'm a huge sucker for underdogs. One of my favorite things about fantasy, almost all fantasy books have an underdog, and that just instantly drew me in. Like, Vin is the ultimate underdog. And I think also just the overall structure of the whole trilogy, like it feels like almost 3 self-contained stories, but still, like, you definitely can see like a progression throughout the whole series as well. And I know people have different opinions about it, but I loved every single book of it. They're quite different from each other, but it just works so well as a trilogy. And when I read it, you can almost feel like this could be a movie. It feels very cinematic to read it, or even a video game.
Well, it sounds like that's maybe possible, hopefully coming up in the future, which would be a little nerve-wracking, but also exciting.
I mean, I would love a Assassin's Creed type of game just with the Mistborn world. Open world, hard magic system. It would just be incredible. So guys, if you haven't read Mistborn, definitely worth checking out.
This is our plug, shameless plug to go read Mistborn. If you somehow haven't already. They're also very quick reads, which I appreciated. And that's, I think you mentioned the writing style. And I think even in Stormlight Archive, and I know you've read the first one, correct?
I read the first one.
It follows through even in his Stormlight Archive, where he just, he's not focused so much on the flowery, dense prose. It's just, here's the story, I'm handing it to you. It's very easily accessible. And for him to write something as large scale as Stormlight Archive with that same accessibility is actually really impressive.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me, having just read Way of Kings, what characters, since you're a characters guy, what are the characters that really pulled you in Way of Kings?
Oh man. I don't even, like, it's been like a year, so like I've which is quite embarrassing. What is the bridge burners guy's called? Why did I forget his name?
Oh, Kaladin?
Kaladin, yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
I mean, I loved Kaladin. Again, a huge sucker for an underdog, really. The only reason why I haven't continued the series yet is just because it's a huge time commitment.
It really is.
And it's just such a long series.
Yeah.
So I'll probably need to like brush up, like get up to date with some of the details. I know there's some really great summaries out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love
it. And I know a lot of people are kind of hesitating on finishing the series or even reading Rhythm of War, because now we have the book 5 that's been pushed out a little bit farther. So, you know, you guys have a little bit more time before the series ends. And I just finished Rhythm of War a month or 2 ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I took a huge break. Yeah. Did
you enjoy it?
I did. I did. I have a lot of mixed opinions about it. It was Sanderson, like, I won't spoil anything, obviously, but Sanderson does explore a lot more of the science of his world in Rhythm of War.
Yeah.
And that isn't my cup of tea. usually. Like I like hard magic systems. I enjoy the boundaries and rules that they create within the story. But the science aspect of it was a bit much for me. What was really interesting to me in that book was some of the relationship psychology that he was doing, which was very fascinating. But I'm definitely at a point where I'm like, all right, Sanderson, how are you going to finish this in book 5? What is going to happen here? Because I have no idea.
Wow. Yeah, I think it was quite interesting. Like you have Shallan, that was the other character, isn't it? So many people have told me that they hate her. And I really enjoyed the character in The Way of Kings. Like something must happen in the later books that I don't know about. And I also like one of the things that Sanderson loves to do is to explore religion and stuff like that. And I mean, a lot of fantasy books, they have religion in them, but it just seems like Sanderson, he isn't afraid to like ask really critical like questions about religion. And even though he is religious himself, like he will have characters that absolutely hate religion and make valid arguments against like why there's no God, why this religion is false, and so on, which I just find fascinating because like we readers, we meet these people in life. Like some people don't believe, some people do believe, and it just makes the story maybe a bit more relatable. I think that you have all of these different characters that have different values and different beliefs as well.
Right.
And Dalinar, that was the other character, and I did enjoy Dalinar, but I just feel like there's more. I need to follow him more. There's a lot of politics, and I mean the politics were fine. Definitely didn't hate him. Enjoyed him quite a bit, but for me, Kaladin and Shallan were just a bit more compelling to me in The Way of Kings. But I've heard that Dalinar becomes an amazing character later on, so we'll see if I agree on that.
Yeah, he's a really good character. I think my favorite of the 4 is Words of Radiance.
Everyone seems to say that.
It's, I think, one of Sanderson's kind of pinnacle moments in the books that he's written. And just the tension in that book. I had to several times put it down because I was so tense that I had to put the book down and go like eat something to calm down. Which, so when an author manages to pull that kind of emotion out of you as a reader, how can you not give it 5 stars? Because it's like, I just felt so many emotions during that book and with all of the characters. Going with Shallan, I think it's interesting with her, and you see this very early on in Way of Kings. I think Shallan was a smart POV character for him simply because it's such a vast world. And Shallan is curious, and she's an artist, and she's exploring alongside us, which gives us a chance him to kind of throw in all of this world building information without it becoming heavy-handed.
And you kind of feel for her, but she's also quite sinister. Like she has like a plot to steal. Well, I've forgotten what it's called, but steal that thing from her.
From Yasna.
So but I'm really looking forward to read Words of Radiance. It's one of those weird things that I know I will love Words of Radiance. Like I am almost 100% sure, which is like one of the reasons why I keep pushing it back. Like I want to really, really have a moment where I can like spend my time really enjoying it, and it just feels like I constantly have new books arriving at my door or arriving at in my Kindle.
One of the problems of being in the book community is it's not often good for your TBR. I know on Goodreads, I think I set up a shelf now where I have my physical TBR books listed. And it was sobering. I have 135 on my physical TBR, and I was like, all right, I need to actually read some of these.
That's so relatable, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah. So with Sanderson in general, so you've read Mistborn, and then you've
I read quite a lot of his work. I haven't read the whole Cosmere, as you probably know, like I haven't read Stormlight, but I read Mistborn. I read the first 2 books, Mistborn Era 2. I read Warbreaker and Elantris and The Way of Kings. So I think that's where I'm at the moment. So my favorite so far has been the Mistborn trilogy. I'm expecting Stormlight to take that place when I eventually will continue that series. My least favorite, like, it's weird. Like Sanderson is such an amazing author, and I haven't read any like bad books from him. Like I don't think he can write bad books, but like Mistborn Era 2, I have found quite disappointing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And Warbreaker, like I gave it 3 stars. Not a bad book at all. And it's worth reading, but it definitely didn't blow my mind, like Mistborn. So
I think it's almost hard once you've read Mistborn or Stormlight Archive to go back to some of the books like Warbreaker or Elantris, because I've read Warbreaker as well. I've started Elantris a couple of times and just could not get through it. But Warbreaker, same for me, was just it's funny because I'm starting to notice archetype characters that Sanderson really likes. And I would say there's even a kind of Vin-like character in Stormlight Archive that I'm very curious once you get farther in the series to see if you notice who she is, because she's a very interesting character, very polarizing character for a lot of people that I've talked to about it. No, in Stormlight Archive. That's like Vin. Yeah. I will say, one of the things I will say about Warbreaker, it's not really a secret in the community that one of Sanderson's not strengths is romance. And I will say that one of the things I appreciated about Warbreaker was that's my favorite romance he's ever written is in that book. I had issues with a lot of the plot type things in the book, but that was something that I was like, oh my gosh, where is this in like the other books that you've written? You know, he can do it. It's there. So yeah, I think it's interesting how even with the authors, there's always going to be, here's the things that they're amazing at, but nobody's ever perfect, even Brandon Sanderson, which is terrifying to say, but yeah, it's such a cool thing when you can look over their body of work and see the growth and the things that you can tell, oh, I liked that, I'm going to use it again in this book. So it's cool when you have a larger group of books from the same author that you can kind of see their progression.
Have you read Mistborn Era 2?
I have not.
No.
I'm afraid of it.
What you say. I mean, I read book 2, what is that called? Shadow of Self. And I was just very disappointed. Like, I didn't care for anyone, really. So I almost feel like I need to reread that book if I should continue. Like, I did finish it, but like I don't remember anything from it at this point. Just quite disappointing in it, to be honest. Like, it's very different. It's not badly written. It's just so different. And that doesn't feel like a Cosmere. Well, in some ways it does, but in a lot of ways it doesn't.
It seems like that trilogy is, well, it's going to be 4 now, isn't it? Cool. That series is also very polarizing in the fandom. It's like people either absolutely love it or they're like, this is way too different, and I'm just going to stick with my Mistborn Era 1 experience and stay there. Which is kind of where I'm at with it, because I'm afraid of kind of ruining the nostalgia and atmosphere that I had from the first trilogy. So I'm just going to very much separate, like, this is its own thing and not try to connect them necessarily.
Definitely do that. That's what I did. I did separate them, which was helpful, and I did enjoy Alloy of Law more than I expected. But Shadow of Self, it just didn't really work for me for some reason. Seems like it's the other way around for most people, that they don't like Alloy of Law but enjoy Shadow of Self more. But Wax and Wayne, decent characters again, but nothing special in my opinion. A lot of the banter is quite cringy. But one thing that I do love about what he's doing with Mistborn is that we, the reader, we get to see how the world has progressed. This is like 400 years after Mistborn Era 1. And you see like how people talk about Era 1 in like a mythological way, almost like these legends from the past. And you have a bit more modern technology in Era 2, which I love. Like, not enough fantasy authors let the world progress into the modern era. I'm really excited to see what Era 3 and 4 will be.
Honestly, who knows at this point?
Well, apparently space in Era 4. That's what I
heard. He's I was talking to somebody yesterday, Andrew Meredith, who wrote Thrice. He's one of the Self-Published Awards semifinalists right now. and he was talking, he used the phrase that Sanderson kind of uses writing as an experiment. Like, I'm going to see what would happen if, and I'm going to write a book about it, in space. What if we put Mistborn in space? And it's kind of, it feels very experimental like that. And I thought that was I can definitely see that. I think Skyward maybe was him like testing the waters. Like, what is, let's try a space YA sci-fi fantasy. So
yeah, it's very cool. And I love seeing like even new authors bringing something new to the table. Just seeing how like modern society and fantasy like blends and stuff like that. It's just very cool. Which is one of these, like, have you read any of the First Law books?
I haven't. Blade itself is on my TBR for October.
Oh, really?
I'm very excited.
I love the Age of Madness, which is the second trilogy. Well, I love the whole series, but Age of Madness, he does what I just mentioned. He lets the world progress. So you see some more modern technology starting to pop up around, and you see like new like conflicts and stuff start to arise because of technology and stuff, which is it's really, really awesome. I love that. And the Greenbone Saga by Fonda, set in a modern, like Asian inspired setting. Just very different, but it's so cool to see stuff like that.
That's another one that I have on my hopefully very near future TBR, because it seems like everyone I know is talking about Jade City. And I'm okay, this is obviously something that is worth the hype, because everybody just absolutely loves it, which I think is awesome. Because I've really loved in fantasy lately, seeing all of these different culture inspired works and getting a chance to see fantasy from very different perspectives, and it adds just such a layer of texture and richness to the books. And as somebody with very Nordic and Western European descent, I love reading books about things that are kind of set in my ancestors' area of the world, and then the next day I can go somewhere completely different and read something from a completely different perspective. And I just think that's one of the beauties of fantasy. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, the Greenbone Saga, arguably the best. I mean, I would probably even rank it higher than Mistborn at this point.
Wow.
Yeah, it is just, well, it's definitely better written. I have more nostalgia for Mistborn, but yeah, it's difficult to say. Like, I do understand why some people don't enjoy it. It's very like Godfather-esque. A lot of politics in it. So if you don't enjoy that, then you probably won't enjoy it. But some of the best characters in fantasy is in Greenbone Saga, and Jade Legacy is arguably the best. It's definitely the top 3 fantasy books I've ever read. That book is insane. It spans over 10 years time. It has so many different POVs.
Wow.
It just comes together beautifully. It's masterful, really.
I'm really excited.
Go in with low expectations though. Like I'm hyped it up too
much. No. The hype on BookTube is already, I mean, I don't think I've talked to a BookTuber yet who wasn't a giant fan of the Greenbone Saga.
Murphy Napier, well, she didn't hate it, but she wasn't a massive fan of it.
Okay. Yeah. I think the first
like Godfather vibes, it didn't really work for her.
Yeah, I think with that one, I'm trying to remember. I think the first review of it I saw was probably Petrix. So that started the bar pretty high as far as my expectations. But yeah, with kind of story elements like that, politics. For me, it's like there's politics in a lot of the books I read. I think like you mentioned with Malazan, it kind of depends on how easily accessible it is. If it's something that I can immediately understand, I don't enjoy books that make me feel like an idiot when I'm reading them. And so anything else, I'm cool with it as long as it's, something that I can easily access when I'm reading and understand. And if there's a good character in there, I'll be fine.
Yeah. For me, like if a fantasy book needs to be one of my favorites, it needs to have really good politics usually. But politics is one of those things that are very difficult to write, and an author really has to be careful about what to include. I did read a self-published book a bit of a year ago that had quite a lot of politics, and a lot of the politics just felt unnecessary. Like it was too realistic. Like you would hear people discuss about like taxes and like food import and stuff like that. and it just didn't feel like it was relevant to anything. It made the story feel realistic because like politicians would discuss those things, but didn't really add much to the story, except that it felt like the world building was more realistic. So but the Green Book Saga has great politics. I read a book called The Counselor a couple of years ago. Very, very underrated, I think. It has amazing politics. But yeah, it's one of those things, like, if it's not done well, it's not good, but it can really, really make a story be incredible if an author is able to convey like the politics and what's going on. But I did social science for 3 years when I did my A-levels, and I've always been interested in politics. So maybe it's a bit easier for me to follow some of the political elements, I suppose, than some other readers.
Yeah.
Depends on the reader, I suppose.
It is interesting too, like talking. I find it interesting to find out people's backgrounds and then look at the books that they enjoy reading, because you can definitely see when you start looking through their list of favorite books, you can kind of start picking out like, oh, here's some things that you probably really enjoy in your books. I'm a big fan of the underdog characters as well as you. I feel bad because I know this is probably very expected, I guess, but I love the emo character with a tragic backstory. I just do. I always love them. Kaladin is a great example of that. Because I think, especially when you have a character like that has a fighting spirit and they're an overcomer, that's really magic to me. Is, you know, they've been through or seen all of this horrible stuff, but they're still fighting through it. They're still, you know, finding purpose in something. And I think that's really inspiring to read. Because the characters that have it all together, you kind of have to raise your eyebrow at most of the time. Like, do you though?
So what have been some of your favorite books of this year?
Oh, this year. What even have I read this year? This is the part where, as fantasy readers, like when I ask you about Way of Kings, you're like, oh, do I remember that? All of that. It's when you read so many books, it's hard to immediately draw. I think one of the ones that I know for sure that I really enjoyed, I read Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. Yep. And I'm currently reading Pawn's Gambit, which is another book in that same trilogy. And one of my favorite tropes in any book ever, but especially fantasy, is a motley crew. I love motley crews so much. And Never Die is essentially like he builds a motley crew through the story, and you get to meet each character as they come in. And it's, you know, this really awesome, rich, war-torn kind of Asian-inspired world. And the characters are just so vibrant. And a lot of them are archetypes that I really enjoy. He has an incredible, strong female lead in that story with Itami Cho. She's amazing. I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. And it's a standalone. So that was one I was like, oh, this is, you know, a short book. I'm just going to pick it up in between series. And I loved it. I read it in a couple of days and I couldn't put it down. So.
Yeah, I really need to get to some of Rob J. Hayes' work. I have so many of his books on my Kindle, and I know I'm going to enjoy them. But
the stack never gets smaller, though.
Never gets smaller. And since I've started BookTube, I don't have as much time to read anymore, which I'm actually fine with. But yeah, it's just different. I used to read much more, and I'm finding myself spending more time recording and editing. But it's also very rewarding to make YouTube videos. I don't have any regrets, but I just don't read as much as I used to.
Yeah. Well, I think one positive to that is that it maybe kind of sharpens your focus when you're choosing books to read when you have less time. You really tend to gravitate towards the ones that maybe you're most excited about because, you know, you don't have as much time. So, all right, if I'm going to read one book this week, I'm going to make sure it's something I'm really excited about. So turning that question back, what is a couple or one of your favorite books that you've read this year?
Oh, really good question. So I think Piranesi by Susanna Clarke.
Really?
Have you read it?
No, but I've heard a lot about it.
Oh, it's so good. It's a standalone as well. It's one of those books that I totally get if people don't enjoy it.
Sure.
But I loved it. It's so different. I don't even know if it's real fantasy. I suppose like it depends on who you ask if it is fantasy or not. It's just so different. It's very heavy on the themes, and has a very unexpected ending, at least for me, and very atmospheric read. Very short. It's like 200 pages.
Yeah.
Would definitely recommend checking it out. I loved it, and even if you don't enjoy the book, I think even like the themes, you would appreciate the themes at the very end of it.
Yeah.
The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne.
Okay.
Excellent. Have you read any of Ryan Cahill's books?
Not yet, but that is another one that I am definitely. I have it in my Amazon cart right now, actually.
All right. Yeah. So The Exile, which is his most recent book, which is a standalone like novella, was really, really good. Temeraire by Naomi Novik. Really enjoyed that one. Yeah, great dragons depictions. Yeah, so those are some of my favorites so far. And actually, Elantris, I know you struggle with that one.
Yeah.
I went in expecting to not enjoy that one at all.
Yeah.
I just wanted to read it, so I had read it, but I actually ended up enjoying it quite a bit. So.
Yeah, I really liked. I watched your video on reading it, and it was one of those things where, I'm trying to remember when the last time I tried to read it was, but it was quite a while ago, and I thought, now that I've read more fantasy, I wonder if Elantris might be worth another shot at some point in the future here, because I know the concept of it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah. I'm
it's
definitely
one of those things that you go in expecting to hate it, and when it's actually just like a bit over the bar, then you get surprised, and that was very much the case. Like it's not one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. At all, but I really did expect to hate it. And when I didn't, I was just pleasantly surprised, and has some really great themes.
Yeah. What, going along with that, what is a book that you've read either recently or in the past that, besides Elantris, that really surprised you with how good it was?
Oh, yeah, that's quite an easy one. I don't think many people have read this one, but Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson, which is a self-published book, is an 800-page book. It's massive, but I just was totally mesmerized by that book. And there's 4 different POVs. Loved every single one of them.
Wow.
It's definitely gaining some traction in the indie community, but it deserves more love for sure. The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which is a new release.
I just bought that one.
Yeah. It's very different. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, the writing style and how the plot is structured, but I thought the characters were brilliant and the themes were really, really great. And yeah, I mean, the biggest surprise ever was how much I love the Greenbone Saga, but we won't go back into that.
Yeah, well, I will definitely keep you posted, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to be reading that in the next month or 2 here. So yeah, I'll definitely send you some thoughts once I get going on that, because my interest is very piqued based on what everybody has said about it. It sounds amazing. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, but yeah, everyone, if anyone's interested in indie books, check out Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson.
Yes, and I will try and link everything that all the books we've talked about. I will put like a list in the description so that people can go check them out. Because I'm so blown away by. We could talk for an hour just on self-pub right now in fantasy, because there are some incredible new voices coming out in this category. And I'm so happy for the genre, because it's really, I think, going to add a lot of growth to the genre of fantasy, because we've got a lot of authors that aren't tied to a lot of the, traditional boundaries that the publishers are setting for fantasy. And I just think that's awesome to have both moving forward.
It's going to be very interesting to see how things change, because there are some indie authors out there that are earning way more money than traditional published authors, like way more. And it just seems like more and more traditional authors aren't as pleased with their publishing houses. So I've talked to some, and it just seems like they're not very pleased with how much they're earning and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
well, and hopefully
see how everything changes over the next 5-10 years.
For sure. I think it'll be good, because that might put pressure on the publishers to maybe, change some of the things that maybe aren't working for the authors, and hopefully create just a better industry all the way around, which nobody's going to argue about.
So what are some of your favorite self-published books you read?
Well, I'm pretty new into the category of self-pub, but I just finished Voice of War by Zach Argyle.
Oh, nice.
Really enjoyed it.
I actually met him 10 days ago.
Did you? Because at FantasyCon,
Yeah, he was super nice.
Yeah, I had no idea. Again, with any book, you never know what to expect going into it, even if you've heard a lot about it. And with Voice of War, the only thing I'd kind of heard around about it, other than people loving it, was, oh, well, it's very Mistborn-esque.
Yeah.
Which I can see where people might draw that connection, but I didn't get that out of it, I guess, just because, some of the magic system rules are somewhat similar. It didn't feel Mistborn to me in a way that like I expected it to, which I actually really loved. And I thought one of the things I really loved about it was how distinct all of his locations were.
Yeah.
Which is tough to do in a fantasy novel. And, even though we have two cities, they're very different flavor cities. And then we get this almost James Cameron Avatar kind of forest world that was really fascinating. And you've got, checkbox on the animal companion, which I'm very excited about. Especially coming off of Faithful and the Fallen. I'm really into animal companions these days.
Who isn't?
Right. So yeah, I would say that one most recently is one that I read that I was really impressed by. And of course, Rob Hayes is another one that I really enjoyed this year. I have a shelf of self-pub now that I'm going to be trying to get to in the next month or two. And I'm just really excited about it. It's fun to see everybody's different styles and what they're creating within the fantasy genre. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that you go in, you have no idea what to expect. And I mean, some self-published books aren't great, but some are absolutely incredible and worth your time. So it's one of those, if you are willing to invest a bit of time, then you can find some truly incredible books out there. But I'll say about Threadlight by Zach Argyle, that Sons of Light, I think is like better in almost every way. So definitely look forward to that one. That was my favorite book in the series. I'm
very much anticipating a 5-star read for the rest of the series. I gave Voice of War 4 stars in my Goodreads review, and I could tell that everybody was saying it just keeps getting better. So yeah, I'm very much anticipating. I kind of like you with Words of Radiance. I wanted to go right into the rest of the series, but I kind of am hesitating because I know I'm going to love it. So I need a moment where I need a book that I know I'm going to really love. Yeah. Which will probably be October.
The nice, quick, easy reads. So
exactly. Yeah. So final question to wrap up our discussion. What book on your TBR are you most excited to read in the next month or two here?
Oh, so my plan for this year was to get to the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin.
Ah, yes.
Which I still haven't picked up. So I had only 2 trilogies that I really, really wanted to read this year. The Lightship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb, which I have read, and mind-blowingly good. One of the best series I ever read.
Wow.
And the Broken Earth trilogy. I heard so many great things about N.K. Jemisin. That series is getting an adaptation now, and I think all 3 books won a Nebula Award. So
yeah,
I've heard it's different. I heard it's very unique, very heavy on the themes. It's written in second person, which I've never read a book written in second person. So yeah, I'm hoping to get to that one. But my next read after The Prior of the Orange Tree I'll continue the Winnery Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. I read Ninth Reign early this year and loved it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Nice.
What about you?
Oh gosh, what is even on my TBR for this next month? I think honestly, First Law. Yeah, I know that it's a huge favorite in the community, and I've seen a lot of interviews with Joe Abercrombie, and he is just so much fun to listen to when he's talking about writing and characters. And
he's brilliant.
He's a character, and I love it. He's got a lot of, I think, just a very grounded view of writing in general, which I really appreciate. Yeah. As a fellow writer, I've been really inspired by a lot of his philosophies on characterization and that kind of stuff. So, and reading in that video that I recently posted about the first lines of books with my husband, the first line of Blade itself was one of my favorites that we did in that video. I was like, oh, I'm immediately ready for this. Like, so I think that's going to be a fun trilogy this year.
Yeah.
So
the Blade itself is such an interesting read. Like, most people end up loving it, but you might have heard this, but not much happens in the first book.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of people, like, things do definitely happen in the first book, but I was quite surprised by how slow paced it is. You're just like hanging out with these characters for like 500 pages.
Yeah.
But like book 2 and 3 really kicks it up when it comes to like the plot itself. But
yeah,
just be prepared for that, and you'll just chill with these characters for quite a bit.
I think that's one of the benefits of being a character-driven reader versus a plot-driven reader is, you know what? If we're just hanging out with some awesome characters and I like them for 500 pages, I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
So,
well, my favorite is Age of Madness. Like, I enjoyed the first trilogy a lot, but Age of Madness just blew my mind. I thought it was better. It's probably like an unpopular opinion, but I thought it was better than the first trilogy.
Nice.
So, but I would love to reread the first trilogy someday. We'll see if that ever happens.
Yeah. Well, you know, the list never stops.
It never stops.
Never stops. Well, I want to thank you so much for being willing to jump on my channel and have a discussion with me about some of our favorite books and some books that we weren't sure how we felt about. Best of luck with your channel. I saw that you're almost to 10,000 subscribers. So huge congratulations for all the success that you've had. It's so well deserved.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much for hanging out and chatting today.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was really a lot of fun.
Awesome. If anybody wants to check out Johan's channel, Library of a Viking, I will put all of his information down in the description below. So if you aren't already subscribed to his channel, you should do that. And yeah, I hope you guys are all having a fabulous week with fabulous books, and we will see you in the next video.